In this presentation, we'll discuss unions and labor market monopoly power. Craft unions are unions composed of workers who engage in particular trades or skills. Collective bargaining is the negotiation between the management of a company or of a group of companies and the management of a union or group of unions for the purpose of reaching a mutually agreeable contract that sets wages, fringe benefits, and working conditions for all employees in all unions. The Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor are a couple of unions in the United States. Some of the major early issues for labor were 8-hour workdays and equal pay for men and women. Industrial union formation was bolstered by the National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933 and the National Labor Relations Act of 1935, otherwise known as the Wagner Act. The Wagner Act gave unions the right to organize workers and to engage in collective bargaining. The Congress of Industrial Organizations, or CIO, was formed in 1938. It was composed mainly of industrial unions. Prior to the formation of the CIO, most labor organizations were craft unions. Not dissimilar from craft unions, industrial unions are labor unions that consist of workers from particular industries, such as automobile manufacturing or steel manufacturing. As a counter to union power, Congress passed the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. This act allowed the right-to-work laws, which is just a law that makes it illegal to require union membership as a condition of continuing employment in a particular firm. It also made closed shops illegal. These are businesses in which employees must belong to the union before they can be hired and must remain in the union after they're hired. However, union shops are legal. This is just a shop where non-union members can join later. It also prohibited jurisdictional disputes. These are disputes involving two or more unions over which should have control of a particular jurisdiction. Additionally, sympathy strikes, or strikes where a union is striking simply to support a separate union strike, were prohibited. Also, secondary boycotts, where boycotts of a company that deals with a company being struck, are prohibited under the Taft-Hartley Act. Under the Act, we established the 80-day cooling-off period. Also, a court injunction can be used to delay a strike if it would imperil the nation's safety or health. To get a better hold on the current status of labor unions, let's consider worldwide trends in unionization and trends in U.S. unionization. Here we can see how union membership has declined rather steeply after a heavy increase up to about 1960. Here's a list of the 10 largest unions in the United States. Several factors that are likely to have aided the fall in union membership include deregulation, immigration, and a shift from manufacturing to services. A strike where workers refuse to work for a company is meant to impose costs and reduce profits of the employer. While the workers don't receive wages while they're striking, they may receive compensation from the union strike fund. The presence of strikebreakers can reduce the bargaining power of a strike. These are workers that are put in place to replace union members who are striking. One of the major roles of a union, once establishing a wage rate above the market clearing wage rate, is to ration the available jobs among the excess number of workers who wish to work in the unionized industry. This excess number of workers arises from the difference in the wage rate and the competitive market clearing wage rate. We'll see this effect in the next slide. In this graph, we can see that while the equilibrium wage rate, where the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are exactly equal, is here, if the union wage rate is above this, then we have quantity demanded at this point and a quantity supplied at this point, and so we have a surplus of workers at the union wage rate. To ration, unions often use the seniority system, or lengthen the apprenticeship period, or institute other rationing methods. The union's goal is to maximize the total union member income earned. Several union strategies include employing all union members, maximizing member income, and maximizing wage rates for certain workers. They attempt to raise wages indirectly by limiting entry over time and altering the demand for union labor. One way to raise wage rates without specifically setting wages is for the union to limit the total size of the employed workforce. Here we can see that if we stop the supply curve and shift it into a vertical line, then if we can shift the demand curve out as a union, we increase the wage rate without actually setting a wage rate. So after limiting the supply, how do we increase the demand for union labor? Several possibilities include increasing worker productivity, increasing the demand for union-made goods, or decreasing the demand for non-union-made goods. So a few questions to consider. Do union members earn higher wages? Are they more or less productive than non-unionized workers? And what are the broader economic effects of unionization? Unions are able to raise wages if they can successfully limit the supply of labor in a particular industry. Some economist estimates have union wage premiums at roughly $2.25 an hour. However, individual union workers may not have higher incomes because they may be working fewer hours than they normally would. So how do unions affect labor productivity? Well, there's some evidence that feather bedding creates inefficiencies in unionized industries, and some economists argue that unions actually enhance productivity by reducing labor turnover. Feather bedding is just any practice that forces employers to use more labor than they would otherwise, or to use existing labor in an inefficient manner. Benefits and costs of labor unions. There are two opposing views. Unions are monopolies whose main effect is to raise the wage rate of high seniority members, or unions increase labor productivity by promoting generally better work environments. Now let's consider a monopsony. We make several assumptions. First, a firm is a perfect competitor in the product market. It cannot alter the price of the product it sells, and it faces a perfectly elastic demand curve for its product. Second, one factory not only hires the workers, but also owns all the businesses in the town. This buyer of labor is called a monopsonist, the only buyer in the market. The monopsonist faces an upward sloping supply curve of labor. We call the additional cost to the monopsonist of hiring one more worker the marginal factor cost. The marginal factor cost of increasing the labor input by 1 unit is greater than the wage rate. Thus, the marginal factor cost curve always lies above the supply curve. In panel A, we see the quantity of labor supplied and the corresponding required hourly wages along with the calculations for marginal factor cost. Here in panel B, we have those graphed. So let's consider employment and wages under monopsony. To determine the number of workers that a monopsonist desires to hire, compare the marginal benefit to the marginal cost of each hiring decision. The marginal cost is the marginal factor cost curve that we just looked at, and the marginal benefit is the marginal revenue product curve. In the next slide, we'll show graphically how a monopsonist finds its profit-maximizing quantity of labor demanded at A, where marginal revenue product is equal to marginal factor cost. In here, we see that A is the profit-maximizing point, and this is where the marginal revenue product curve intersects the marginal factor cost curve. Monopsonistic exploitation is just the paying of a price for the variable input that is less than the marginal revenue product. It's the difference between marginal revenue product and the wage rate. Now let's consider how a monopsony responds to a minimum wage law. To maximize its economic profits under the minimum wage, the monopsony equalizes the minimum wage rate with marginal revenue product. Thus, establishing a minimum wage can generate higher employment at a monopsony firm. Here we can see graphically that in a straight monopsony, the wage rate would be here, where marginal revenue product intersects marginal factor cost quantity, determines the wage rate for that given supply on the supply curve. However, if we introduce a minimum wage, then the monopsony just operates where the minimum wage is equivalent to marginal revenue product. A bilateral monopoly is a market structure consisting of a monopolist and a monopsonist. Now let's consider an example for why a union may not form despite a large increase in the number of workers. In the fast food industry, the number of workers has increased from less than 3.5 million in 2000 to more than 4.1 million today. So why is the unionization of fast food workers difficult? Well, most of the 200,000 fast food restaurants are franchisees with individual owners, so it's difficult to bargain with all of them separately. Most employees have short tenures. so it's hard to increase the marginal productivity, and most workers earn wages slightly above the minimum wage, so the payoffs to unions are relatively small.